Hello and welcome to CVG's Ryse preview from E3. I'm Tim Clark. I'm joined by Dan Dawkins, Tim Weaver, and we're about to hear from Games Master Editor Matthew Pellett, who's been to see Ryse, had a hands-on with it, and he's going to deliver his verdict. Will Caesar be pleased or displeased? You're about to find out.
Hi there, welcome to E3 2013. I'm joined by Matthew Pellett, the editor of Games Master magazine, who's been to play Ryse. Matt, Ryse, it was a Connect game.
So Ryse was originally announced a few years ago. It's of course the Crytek made Connect game, or at least it was the Connect game for then the Xbox 360. Now it's an Xbox One launch game that is better with Connect, but actually you use a controller. And it's quite a damning indictment of Connect, to be honest. This was their flagship Connect game a couple of years ago, and they said, actually, you know what, it's better off with a controller, not Connect. And it's not the only game Microsoft have done that with. Crimson Dragon, which is very much like Panzer Dragoon Saga, that's another game that was Connect. It's now a controller-based game because the fans wanted it, and let's be honest, it would play better.
So when you had your hands-on session with it, were you playing with a controller, or did you try the Connect functionality still?
So with Ryse, you have to play it with a controller. The Connect functionality is it's sort of like Mass Effect. You give voice commands, so you can either press left bumper to tell people to duck from arrows, or you can tell them with your voice. But actually, it plays a bit like it's a bit like God of War. I guess it's Microsoft's God of War, and you walk around, fighting people, and you have to do that with a controller.
And what about the combat then? I mean, how did you find it looked great from what we saw at the Microsoft conference, but how did it actually feel?
Not that great, I'll be honest. It's a very nice looking game, but very, very basic. You've got the A button is your deflect button, so you use it when there's an incoming attack to knock people back. X is stab, Y is shield bash, and B is execute, basically. People have labelled it as the QTE button, which is a half-truth. It's not technically a QTE, because if you mess up, you'll still do the attack that you've asked for, you won't fail. But it's a very, very simple game. People look at this and well, at least on the level that I played anyway, you're not going to get a God of War level of combos and whatnot. This is 3-button inputs at most, and it's very basic. Okay,
so it's coming out, it's a launch title for Xbox One, but Matt, is it a must-have title at launch?
Well, I guess on that basis, I would say no. As I say, I'll caveat with the fact that it's a demo. It's the first time they've showed it, so they want to go with something quite basic so people can get their heads around it. I'll just argue it's not much to get your head around. I seriously hope it ramps up in later levels, because what they showed was a typical launch game for a new generation, in that it looks lovely, it looks nicer than stuff you could get on the previous console, but it's super basic. Shadow of Rome, I think, on the PS2, there was more going on in that than what I played in Ryse.
Okay, thanks very much, Matt. More on Ryse as we get it.
Blimey, Matt doesn't mess around. I think that was the old thumbs down from Mr. Pellett. Chaps, are you surprised by that?
I'm not surprised one bit, to be honest. I've got to admit, I think what we saw at the Microsoft conference was looked pretty basic, and Matt basically says that it is that game that we saw, and that's a lot of button inputs, a lot of QTEs. I don't know what more you can really.
But Tim, what if I told you the smoke on the towers uses more processing, imagine this, than an entire game on Xbox 360?
I'd say that's I can smell something.
Smell the smoke.
What game was it? The Noughts and Crosses XBLA game?
Yeah, tic-tac-toe. Yeah.
I don't know, like when we watched it at the conference, initially when you saw them sort of piling off the boat and running onto the beach, everyone was going, it's Medal of Honor meets Spartacus, and that seems like, when I say it now, I even feel quite excited by the idea of it. But then as soon as you see the actual combat, it's like light hit, heavy hit, X, Y, X. It just seemed like you could almost feel that it was, as Matt suggested, pretty simplified and clumsy's too far to say, having not played. But it looked just very kind of uninspiring.
I wonder whether that's a sort of a result of it having originally been built for Connect. They had to keep the sort of inputs quite simple in order for it to work on Connect. But Connect, the original Connect, was such a relative failure in terms of the amount of games that actually work properly for it, that they've now put it onto a controller, and maybe that's the reason it's so simple.
If you design a game for controller, a really good combat game for a controller, let's say Street Fighter, right? Top level commands in that are things like, square, triangle, half second pause, quarter circle turn, triangle circle. You're not going to say that and say it with any timing. That's ridiculous. You've got to reduce it to punch, punch, block, block, punch. Like that sort of thing. And apparently, like Tim says, it's been retrofitted from probably a quite facile control scheme. And as a result, the game is perhaps not quite as basic as it looks. It looks like QTEs, right? But apparently it's just that it shows you the buttons at the end of your quite basic combo.
Right. I think there's an element with which, any sort of AAA video game takes like a minimum of 2 years to make, often longer. And if you decide halfway through that process you're going to fairly radically change the way players input into it, that has to have a really significant knock-on effect. There was an interesting thing I read elsewhere where people were suggesting that Super Mario 3D World, the Wii U game, is in fact something that's been ported off of 3DS to get onto Wii U because they're so desperate to have a 3D Mario on Wii U. Now, I think that'll be a great game from what I've seen from the looks of it, but you can see how the kind of effect that making a big change like that so late in development has on any game.
I thought at the conference it looked really visually, it looked really nice. But even then, I thought, considering it's running on CryEngine, which we know can produce some stellar-looking games, I didn't think it looked that like Crisis 3 on a PC level of good.
Well, Dan, you were telling me that in addition to your smoke stat, that the eyeball contains...
Yeah, now, Marius Titus, great name for a Roman centurion or whatever he is, he's got more processing in his eyes than most characters have in their entire bodies.
Well, they've wasted that because you play from behind his head. You can't even see his eyes.
Then the gameplay is rudimentary. Like, it does include Connect, so you can, like Matt just said, you shout at the screen and you can say, guys, put your shields down, or shields down, and that kind of thing. But it's quite basic. It even uses smart glass integration. But again, it gives you hints and tips for a game that is like essential 3-4 button combos.
Have you ever used smart glass?
Nope.
No, not to any rate.
I've attempted to use smart glass on my phone and on my iPad to control my 360. I found it an incredibly clunky experience, but hopefully I presume they're going to update it for Xbox One. I think the pity with Ryse is there's scope for a brilliant. Spartacus has been really popular over three or however many seasons. Super violent, super sexy. There's definitely room for a game like that. We were mentioning off air, like Shadows of Rome was or Matt mentioned that Shadows of Rome had more going on in it, and that the whole Roman milieu. I went there.
Nice word.
Yeah.
It's been barely touched by games except for the Total War series.
Yeah, we had the official Spartacus game from Ubisoft, which was awful.
Is that even a thing? That's completely bypassed me.
Yeah, well, I assume it came out. I don't know now, but they definitely announced it and produced screenshots for it. And I was the same as you when I saw it kind of open up on the beaches, but beyond the barbarian stronghold, and it looked a bit like Medal of Honor meets Spartacus, which I love Spartacus. I thought it was a great show. I was properly excited. By the end of it, I was not so excited. I've got to admit, my excitement's been quite tempered.
Shadows of Rome tapped into the sort of the camp and the theatre of it. It would be like Colosseum.
No one liked the stealth bits with the fey blonde boy, did they?
Kind of sucked. But like when you were chopping men's arms off and they'd be like flailing around trying to fight you, that's great. You could fight tigers. That's great. Ryse looks like
those are still some of the best tigers ever committed to gaming memory.
Yeah, and I think Ryse looks more like a sort of po-faced Medal of Honor style take on epic scale. It looks kind of cool to me. Like the emotive sweep of it was quite good.
Just before we go, Matt touched on the idea that along with the Crimson Dragon game, that both had switched from being Kinect only to pad games. Do you think that points to a slightly to concerns over Kinect? It's arguably the inclusion of the Kinect camera that's forced the price of the Xbox One to be $100 more. You can almost write that off entirely against the camera.
We haven't really had an opportunity to see the new Kinect in action because they pretty much downplayed it at the show.
Barely mentioned at the presser.
But what I do know is I went out and bought Kinect day one, and it apart from a couple of games, it's rubbish.
I had an HD DVD drive, so if you want to talk about failed purchases,
so maybe they haven't, like you say, maybe they haven't got confidence in it, or I'd like to think my hope is that the new Kinect is good enough for these sort of games to work, because I think the potential, the tech potential is amazing, but they just need the right kind of games for it, not just like sports games and dance games.
A brutal showing then in the Colosseum of opinion for Ryse. But stay tuned to CBG and the CBG YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe for more E3 reaction and coverage throughout the week and the days to come.